Joseph Dispenza and Dispenza Financial LLC are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Up B2B. I'm your host, Ed Delia, second generation president of Delia Associates, the place where B2B brands go to grow. Today I'm joined by Joe Dispenza, founder of Dispenza Financial Total Wealth Management and author of the newly released book, Freedom is the Goal: Essential Steps Toward Building Wealth. With nearly 40 years of experience across investment planning, corporate treasury management, and financial strategy, Joe has spent his career helping individuals, business owners, and family-run enterprises build wealth with clarity and discipline. His new book distills those decades of insights into a practical guide for anyone pursuing long-term financial freedom. Joe, welcome to Growing Up B2B.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Great to be here.
Great to have you. Hey, let's dive into some questions here.
Sure.
So let's start with the new book, 4 Decades in Financial. And what was that moment or insight that said, hey, it's time to put it down in writing?
About 5 years ago, I started writing a blog, and I really enjoy writing. I didn't realize how much I enjoy writing. And suddenly, after writing a bunch of them, I thought, there's a book here, that there's enough information that I think I can format it into a book. And I started writing a book, just had a little bit of information and just started putting it together.
The title was powerful. Freedom is the goal. What does, what does financial freedom mean to you? And why do you think so many business owners, specifically family business leaders, misunderstand what that is and what it takes?
I think freedom to me means you get up every day and you can do what you want. And when I put financial plans together for people, a lot of it is, when I say it this way, people agree with me, and I say, you want to be able to retire and choose not to. Yeah, that's really what gives people a lot of freedom. And if you wake up and you love your job and you want to keep going, you have the ability to go ahead. If you wake up one day and say, I can't stand this job and I really need to have something else to do, having that financial freedom to do what you want to do is very powerful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So across your career, you've worked with countless family-run companies, multi-generational businesses. When you think about those specifically, and that's who comprises our listenership, what do you think some of their biggest financial blind spots might be?
Oh, there's a lot. The family-run businesses and all businesses, really, having enough capital to do what you need to do is critical. There are a lot of businesses that take on an awful lot of debt, and that's a blind spot. You don't want to buy things that you don't have to. I think we'll probably get into that a little more later. But having a plan and not just winging it is a big part of having a successful business, because a lot of people end up in a business because they were doing something in a certain way and they decided to make it a business out of it. Didn't have the planning in place ahead of time. Most businesses start because there was a good idea and let's get started. And most businesses don't start with a business plan. They just don't. Most people put a business plan together when they need to get financing from a bank, but they don't usually have a plan together ahead of time. So that is one of the things from a small business that, if I can impart it on them, is to do a little more planning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I've seen, as I'm sure you have, a broad variety of, I'll just call it appetites for debt.
Yeah.
Some, like me, we understand debt, but we don't really like to hold a lot of debt. We're debt averse. We're very conservative.
Yeah.
I've seen other businesses that are really living on the ragged edge and carrying massive debt. Is there a healthy model or a best practice that you've seen either among your clients or other businesses that says, hey, some debt's okay, too much debt, not okay, but there's a healthy balance somewhere in there?
Yeah, and I do. There's a chapter in the book about debt and credit, and really there are different kinds of debt. There are certain debt is productive. You buy for a business, for example, if you wanted to buy a plant, a manufacturing plant, or just a place to work, and you wanted to buy it instead of rent it, that's productive debt to take on that mortgage, because the value of the real estate is probably going to rise as the value of the mortgage lowers over time. So that's productive debt. When you start taking on debt for things that are not going to be accretive to earnings, things that are not going to really help the bottom line, that's when you start to get into trouble. We want to refurnish the entire office, and we're going to take out a loan to refurnish the entire office. Hold on, that probably isn't a good use of debt. Yeah. Knowing what you want to do with that debt and is it going to add to the bottom line, that's critical.
By the way, I made that mistake. I'll admit it. Like back in, I think it was like the late 90s. But of course, the office had not been renovated for 20 years and it looked like from the 1950s. And it was becoming counterproductive to bringing on new staff because they walked in and thought they were in a time warp.
I did the same thing. When I first opened my next month will be 20 years that I went out on my own and started Dispenza Financial. And when I first outfitted the office on Main Street, definitely bought things I didn't need because you wanted to have a certain kind of office. And I looked back on it later and said, yeah, I could have slipped that expense.
In a lot of family businesses, and you've probably heard that, you've seen this, you've probably heard it, a lot of the wealth is tied up in the company itself.
Yeah.
And what do you say, or how do you respond if an owner in a family business says, the business is my retirement plan? How do you deal with that?
Well, the first thing you want to make sure is, are they correct when the business is the retirement plan? There are a lot of small businesses that the person is the business and it doesn't have a lot of value if they went to sell it. I'm trying to think of, for example, there are people that are contractors. If they wanted to sell their business, if there's a general contractor, they are the business. And there aren't a lot of other contractors that would want to buy that because you're not getting a recurring revenue stream. You're not getting things that are going on and on. Same thing, certain types of attorneys, real estate attorney, that's transactional. So you're constantly having to drum up business. But if you had a type of attorney business where you had corporate clients and it was ongoing, retainers, things like that, then there's a value in the business. So the first thing I would tell those people is make sure that there really is a value of that business to sell it, because you might be mistaken that it's not there. And then if it is sellable, make sure you have a proper valuation so you know exactly how much it's worth.
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah.
So going back to a little bit of your history, you have a corporate treasury background from going back to your days at Prudential.
Yeah.
What extent does that experience or that expertise show up in the way you advise maybe privately held family companies on managing cash reserves or managing risk?
Quite a bit, actually. The cash reserves part is really important. We do a lot of cash forecasting for small businesses, mid-sized businesses. The cash forecasting is critical, and it sounds very technical, cash forecasting, but it's really just budgeting. And what do we have? What do we know we're going to have for expenses in the next 12 months? What do we think we're going to have the next couple of years that we're going to have to buy? Those are critical items. And if you know what your forecast looks like for expenses coming up, then we know exactly how much money to put aside in reserves. You don't want to have every last dollar invested into the business where you don't have cash reserves in case an emergency comes up. So that's really critical. Emergency funds are very important.
Oh yeah. And I've heard different schools of thought on that, like how much is enough, how much is too much. And I can honestly say that we've been on all sides of the spectrum across our history, sometimes a little cash tight and sometimes probably overfunded and in a very defensive position. Is there a rule of thumb, or what do you see in terms of best practice?
For individuals, the rule of thumb is for families, if you have 2 incomes coming in, you should have 3 months of expenses in an emergency fund. If you have 1 income coming in, 6 months. I usually go higher than that, though, because usually people underestimate how much money they'll need in an emergency. For businesses, it's completely custom. It depends on the business. If you have a business that has a huge cash flow coming in, you may need less reserves. If you have a business that's capital intensive, you might need a lot more reserves. So we do the plans for a business. It's completely custom. It depends on the business and how it operates.
That makes a lot of sense, because even as we're talking, that modeling for a manufacturing operation has maybe a high cost of goods or a high operating expenditure. It might look very different than, say, a service business like ours, where we really don't have heavy equipment or assets of that nature or huge cash outlays other than the form of like media or something. But again, not huge to the point that we'd be really watching the cash flow every minute, if you will.
Yeah, especially companies that have an inventory. If they have to manage inventory and they have to do some purchasing and such, where things might get tight in a recession, things like that. That's where we have to customize it for every company, depending on what their cash needs are.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's in your view, an essential wealth building principle that family business leaders often overlook, maybe because they're too much in the business, too focused on the deliverables of work product? But what's a principle that's often missed or overlooked?
Yeah, one of the things I say in my advertisement for corporate treasury is that people get so busy working in the business that they don't have time to work on the business. And I would say the biggest principle is to have a plan and keep going back to the plan. It's not unlike when a company has a mission statement and they make a decision, do we want to go into this avenue of business? And they look back at the mission statement. How does this fit the mission? If you have a plan, a financial plan for the business, keep going back to the plan. How does this help the plan? How does it hurt the plan? Because a lot of times you want to make a purchase with something or use the money for something. And if it doesn't fit into the plan, it might not be a good idea. And then you adjust the plan as necessary. But having a plan is the critical portion of it. And get expert advice, I would say. There are certain things you just can't be good at. If you're a manufacturer, you may not be good at corporate treasury management.
Yeah.
If you're buying something, if you're a contractor and you want to buy a building to house all your equipment, get an expert in commercial real estate. Don't try to do it yourself, because we can't all be good at everything.
Good point.
So have a plan and get some expert advice. Yeah.
Yeah, if there's one point that you're really hammering home, that would be it. And I think it's excellent, very sound advice.
Yeah. Oh, and if I can just add one more thing, your business is one of those things where everybody thinks they can do their own marketing. But there are nuances to marketing in a business that you don't want to try to do it yourself, because it has evolved so much, especially with everything online. That's a piece of expert advice that don't overlook it. Don't think that you can just do it yourself. Some things are just worth paying for.
Yeah, to certain buyers. And some people are the avid do-it-yourselfers, and that's okay too. We often say that's just not our client, and that's okay.
Exactly.
At some point, they might get tired of that, and they might become our client. So
that's right.
No, we never sweat that. But I do want to ask a question that's near and dear to me as a second generation. I think I was like maybe 3 weeks on the job, and my dad hands me this stack of papers. And it was the P&L for, I think I started in August. So it was the P&L for July. And I'm 22 years old, Joe. I never saw a P&L before in my life, maybe briefly in an econ class, not that I remembered. So I'm looking through all the documentation, and I see a number in the first column, and it's in parentheses. And I said, Dad, why is this number in parentheses? He said, we lost money in July. Then I look over at the next column, which was year to date, and there's a bigger number in parentheses. And I said, Dad, what's this about? He goes, we've been losing money all year. And my first thought is, what the heck did I just get myself into by committing to come in and eventually buy this business? But the point I'm making is a lot of second gen and third and fourth, maybe we get involved in the family business operation, and we learn that before we learn financial literacy, or we're learning financial literacy on the fly, as I more or less did. What guidance might you give that rising generation who suddenly finds themselves looking at financials for the first time and ultimately being put in a position where they've got to start making some financial decisions?
What I would say is know your limitations and know what you're good at and stick to the core competency of the business. In your case, great marketing company, right? And if you don't know the financial part, get somebody. A bookkeeper is worth a lot of money if you have a bookkeeper to keep track of all those things. That is the advice I would say in that situation is make sure you understand what you know and make sure you understand what you don't know. Understanding what you don't know is very important in life. You can prevent a lot of mistakes if you can own up to the fact that you don't know everything and get expert advice. That's what I would say. And one of those mistakes is that a lot of people tend to plow all the money they have back into the business. And that's not always a good plan. Yeah. And so that's where the expert advice comes in.
So let's build on that. And that may be one of them, but let's talk about mistakes.
Yeah.
So what is often the most expensive financial mistake that you see a family-owned B2B company make, maybe even especially in the years leading up to a transition? Some of those mistakes or pitfalls that they hit.
A big mistake is putting all the money, every dollar, back into the business, because it gets back to the question you asked me earlier about when somebody is the business or they think the value of the business is different than what it really is. You should diversify some and take some money out of a business, put money back into the business that will make it grow. No question about it. You want to, if you're a manufacturing company, you want to have machinery that's going to get the job done and be able to produce. But you also want to get some money out of that business and have separate investments for those tough times that inevitably will happen. Or if the business isn't going to be worth as much as you think down the road, you have a separate portfolio. That's critical. One of the biggest mistakes I see is that everybody puts every dollar back into the business. And one other reason it's not a good idea now, particularly to put every dollar back into the business, is because we don't know how AI is going to impact certain businesses. A business you think might be worth something 20 years down the road may not be. There might be a cheaper way for AI to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's obviously a theme that I think just about every industry is tracking, or a development, I should say, not a theme. It's more a theme.
Yeah,
It's real.
absolutely. That's right.
And I think we're all taking our different approaches to it and integrations to it and understanding of what it means and what the implications are.
Yeah.
But it's probably been there's definitely been some, I'd say, major disruptive innovations in my industry, but usually they're industry centric. This one,
Yeah.
Joe, is the first one that seems to permeate virtually every industry. So that's fascinating.
We're looking at it in my industry too. Right now, it's a help for us. I'll use Perplexity or things like that. We have note takers, AI note takers. So far, it's been a help for me, but eventually it could get to a point where AI does a lot more than just help.
For sure.
Yeah.
So getting back to your book, one of the major themes is this idea of confidence in decision making for the leader. Some of the key behaviors or processes that help business owners make better or more consistent financial decisions and choices.
There's no question it's having a plan in place.
Okay.
When you have a plan in place that you can go back to and just reference and say, how does this fit into the plan that we have established? That is a good guide for anything. It's not unlike anything else in life. If you have a plan, if you were building a house and you wouldn't just go and just start building a house without a blueprint. You'd have the blueprints. You'd go to an architect, get blueprints. And then whenever there's a question on the plan, the engineer is going to go back to the blueprints, right? The same thing with a business. When you have a plan, whether it's a financial plan, whether you have a marketing plan, plans are the things that you can always fall back to when you have trouble and say, what did the plan say? How does this fit in overall? And that's the key, always having a plan in place.
Cool. And getting back to, I wanted to circle back from on that idea of that owner that's inclined to reinvest every dollar back into the company. How do you help them how do you show them that maybe that's not the best way forward, that balancing that out with some personal financial security or a little bit of diversification is maybe a better way forward than every dollar and it goes right back in?
Yeah. I'll give stories of situations I've seen in the past where it doesn't work out, where you put every dollar back in, and then just show them the value of diversification, that, you can have this money here in the business and you can have this money here elsewhere, so that if the business struggles, that money is there for you. No business has been immune to struggles in history. So, it's not a matter of if you're going to have struggles at some point, you're going to have struggles. But when I show them that and put it on a timeline of here's where you might come into some struggles and you want to have some assets outside the business, that usually works. Yeah.
And on the subject of money and talking about money, especially in the family business model, sometimes families struggle to talk openly about money.
Sure.
When you're dealing with that family business enterprise where there might be multiple generations in place in the business, how do you navigate that emotional side of financial planning without letting people emotions get the best of people and conflict or other factors derail the progress you're looking to make for the good of all?
Yeah, one thing I like to do with the businesses that I work with, and when all the families involved, is sit them down and treat them as if it's a big board of directors. And we're all sitting here, we're talking about the good of the business, and we make the business an entity in itself. How do we all want to make this business better? You treat it that way, and then you bring in the experts to say, here's what this person knows, and let's listen to them. Here's what this person knows, let's listen to them. And try to take the emotion out of it. Like you said, it's not easy when it's a family business. Family and business sometimes can be oil and water. By bringing in experts, it really helps because you get a different perspective, and it's a neutral party, not a disinterested party, but somebody who doesn't have an emotional attachment to the business. So that's one thing I'll do. Whenever I have a business that has questions on certain things that are outside of my wheelhouse, I'll bring in those experts. I'll bring in an attorney that needs to be brought in, or an accountant, and that kind of helps. Yeah.
And I'm guessing that you probably, in your years, you've seen quite a range of just what I'll call financial literacy on the side of the business leadership. And I think a lot of times we're shaped by our own experiences. So as I mentioned, I've been looking at P&Ls and financial reporting and balance sheets since I was 22, a month out of college. So the idea of looking at that is natural to me. I would feel odd not looking at monthly reporting. And that's been a practice here for every one of my years. There are businesses every now and again I encounter that they don't do that. It's more or less like they're managing the business out of their bank account.
That's right.
I initially, the first few times I ran into that, I was a little shocked. Really? You don't generate like reports and you look at different analysis, and they're like, no, it's, there's more money in the account this month than last month, so we're doing well. I'm like, okay, that's one way to go at it. To what extent do you have a willingness to be a bit of the educator when you're working with a business, especially maybe a family business where you've got that next generation stepping up, who again, maybe has some of the operational acumen, but not the financial acumen that would be needed to ultimately lead?
Very much. Education is a big part of my business. Education, coaching is a big part of my business. You might even say therapist, who knows, depending on the family dynamic. That's a big part of my business. And you're right. There are so many that are worried about getting to the next Friday that they don't put a lot of effort or a lot of thought into diversifying their business, doing something with the finances. It's not in their bailiwick, so they just wing it. And I see that an awful lot. I one time presented to a group, a contractor group, and I was talking about treasury management. And the one guy he said, "You're kidding, right? We're all sitting here faced with, are we going to have enough employees for Friday that they're going to show up?" It was maybe the worst presentation I ever made. And it wasn't a concern. They were really more concerned about surviving than they were about corporate treasury management. So you do have to do a lot of coaching and education.
Yeah, that's funny. If you could, a lot of what you speak on and what you educate and advise on is really, one could frame them as healthy money habits, if you will, good best practices.
Yeah.
So if you could implant just one really good money habit in, say, every business owner that you work with, what might that be and why?
Keep your costs as low as possible and still be able to grow the business. That's the same, by the way, for individuals as it is for businesses. If there was Warren Buffett had said, if you buy more things than you need, soon you'll be spending things that spending or selling things that you do need. It's very important that people keep their expenses as low as possible, because there is going to be that rainy day coming, and you're going to need some funds. And if you don't have if you don't purchase things you didn't need, you'll be in better shape. So always live beneath your means. Same is true for a company.
Yeah. When I look back to the Great Recession in 2008, that was a scary year for a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
But I remember at one point I was like really worried. And then I did some financial modeling. I said, and at the time we were living in a townhouse. Our mortgage was very low. Our expenses were low. Our taxes were not terribly high by New Jersey standards, of course.
Yeah.
And when I did some simple math, I'm like, you know what? If we had the darkest day where at the time, my wife was working and I was running the business, if everything shut down, we had enough savings to cover us for a year. And I think that kind of helped me breathe a little easier. I'm like, okay, that's our darkest day. We probably won't both go to zero income on the dot. That's highly unlikely. But if it did, we're okay. We've got a runway. But that was definitely, to your point, a scary time. And you don't necessarily know when or who knew that a global pandemic would blow through.
And to that point, the Great Recession, that crash, was a critical moment in history. Forget about just financial history. It was a critical moment in history. And it informs all the decisions I make and all the recommendations I make going forward, because I'm always looking at, financial planners are a dour bunch. We're always looking at the worst case scenario. I'm always trying to keep that in mind, that if we had another situation like that, how are we positioned? How is it positioned if we had another situation like that? Because in that case, the entire credit market froze.
Yeah.
And if you have a company that's relying on credit for payroll, anything like that, are we capitalized enough that we could withstand that again, or anything close to it?
Yeah. But I learned that from an early mentor. He's got and he wasn't, I wouldn't call him dour. He was very pragmatic.
Yeah.
But he said, always have in the back of your mind that game plan for the darkest day.
Yeah.
Because if you have the game plan for the darkest day, one, it won't be so dark. And two, you'll know what to do.
Yeah.
So I always, somewhere across every calendar year, I'll reflect on that and say, okay, let's just say a few things didn't go our way. And the sun didn't rise and fall as it was meant to tomorrow, what would that look like? And what would we do? And I think it's been, it's not the most fun thing you're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like
But
testing out your smoke detectors.
it forces you to think, what
Yeah.
will I do when confronted with that situation? And so a healthy practice.
Yeah, plan for the worst and hope for the best.
So
Exactly.
there you go. Better said than I. So going to put you on the spot here a little bit.
Go ahead.
So you built a career on advising others and a successful one at that.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about one lesson from a setback or challenge in your own financial journey that maybe changed or molded how you now work with clients today.
Oh, yeah. We've been talking about having not enough cash or being undercapitalized. When I went out on my own and started my own firm, I was undercapitalized. I just felt it was the right time to do this. It was the right time for me to go out on my own. But looking back, it would have been nice to have an awful lot more capital behind me. It became rough in the beginning years for that reason. But like everybody else, most other people that start a business, you start a business because you have a good idea and you think it's time. But I would have certainly put more planning behind it, and I would have had more capitalization behind me for sure. Yeah. So it was a struggle early on for sure. And yeah, so that was my biggest lesson. Really, was if you're going to start something, make sure you have a lot of money behind you to do it. If you can, sometimes you can't, but if you can, put a plan behind it.
Yeah, so you can be speaking from experience.
Exactly.
Theoreticals.
Yeah.
So now if we look forward, we think about the years ahead, maybe the decade ahead, because a lot of times family businesses think in terms of generations and decades versus the typical 3 to 5 year sprints that other entities might look at. But what do you think, if you were to crystal ball out a few years, the biggest opportunities might be for the family-owned B2B company to ultimately build wealth, maybe outside the business itself?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunities are also the biggest challenges, and that's AI and technology. With some businesses, if you're talking manufacturing businesses, robotics might be an incredible opportunity for the business itself.
Yeah.
To build wealth outside of the business, I still maintain that a separate portfolio, if you can get some money out of the business and put it into a separate portfolio, a portfolio of whatever is appropriate for the company, whether or not it's bonds, stocks, et cetera, real estate, whatever it is, but having money put aside separate from the company so that you can make other investments. And if the business ended up being affected by something out of your control, you have enough separately from the business to rely on. Yeah, I think those are the challenges that all businesses are going to face going forward. All of them.
Yeah. And I haven't dug into it too deeply, but I've been on the peripheral hearing some vernacular about this idea that, I think we've moved away from that generation where, and I guess maybe you and I are dinosaurs in that regard because we've been doing the same darn thing for decades.
Starting to feel that way.
But way back when I started, you go to a big company, you stay with that big company for your entire career.
Yeah.
And that's your mission, that's your life's work, that's it. And you retire with that company. Fast forward to today, sometimes that happens. Oftentimes it doesn't. And even to the point where there's now discussion that people are really going to not only shape change their careers every 3 to 5 years, but kind of shape change their whole identity and what they're doing and what they're about every 3 to 5 years, which to me, being a second gen in a 61-year-old company seems very foreign. With that mindset, what would you say to that? What do you think of that? Does that make sense to you? And if so, how might you advise that type of client who's potentially going to be in something different every 5 years?
I think you're spot on with that because when I started with Pru, I was 18 years old and I thought I'd worked there my entire life. And 12 years later, I was doing something completely different. And I think the average person goes through something like 3 different careers in their lifetime.
Yeah.
And I would say that if that's going to happen, if people are going to change careers, which is already happening, and there's really not that great loyalty between company and employee anymore for the large companies. And if people are going to go through different careers, there's not a better time in history to do it because the information that's out there for us to learn things everything's at the tip of your fingers. I would say learn everything you can about a lot of different things so that you can become well-versed in different items. You can learn with the technology that's out there now. You and I both, the businesses we have right now, you with your company, me with my company. If we were doing this company 30 years ago, we'd need a lot more employees and it'd be a lot harder to get the knowledge that because you'd have to go to a class, physically go to the class. You'd have to have a lot more people to handle the tasks that are being done by computer now. So I would say for those people, for every person on earth, I would say dig in and learn as much as you can, because the information is at your fingertips right now. And so the opportunities, because the information is there, the opportunities are there too. And there's things that are going to happen in 10 years we're not even thinking about that are going to be careers. My career as a financial advisor career didn't exist 30 years ago. It was either stockbroker or insurance agent.
Yeah, it's true.
And there are going to be businesses right now that in 10, 15 years, we're not even thinking of right now. So learn as much as you can. The technology's there. Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very true. I'm thinking back to my early years. I
Yeah.
remember some of the first few talks that I went to that were being given by financial advisors. They opened with, "This is what a financial advisor is."
It still is.
This is what we do.
The book I just wrote there was a couple of chapters dedicated to here's what a financial advisor should be doing for you. Because it used to be, if you were really wealthy, you had a stockbroker.
Yep.
If not, you had an insurance agent, and the insurance agent was trying to do some financial stuff through insurance policies. It's a new industry if you really think about it. Yeah.
But on the flip side, it's gotten far more complex. Financial modeling, financial advisories, there's so many different instruments and vehicles for the deployment of your money. So it's like, well, I think it was a lot. That's probably true for a lot of industries. Mine too. B2B marketing used to be fairly defined channels. Now it's proliferated to, and continues to proliferate to this high diversity of channels. So more complexity, and hopefully means you and I can stick around for a few more years.
Exactly. Yeah. Complex is good. That's exactly right. Exactly.
Without giving the book away, Joe.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could offer one insight from the book, though, that you hope would really become a mindset shift for any business leader, specifically that family business leader who reads it.
I guess it's a recurring theme throughout this conversation, and that is have a plan. Everybody with a plan fares better than those who don't have a plan, because it just gives you a guide to go through things. And that would be it. And in the book, we talk about that. We talk about how to use a financial advisor, how you should have a plan, how the habits should be formed. We even talk about the same thing regarding health. In the end of the book, I talk about health and keeping up your health while you're building your wealth. And the habits there, it's a plan. You have a plan with that also. Anybody with a plan is going to fare better than those who don't have a plan. So that's really the recurring theme, I would say.
And I think having a plan for health is such a great additive, because I've seen that too. And I've been guilty of that, or saying, I don't have time to take care of my health. I got to focus on my business, and using the business as an excuse for, well, a lot of things, right?
That's right.
Too busy. Whereas what I eventually learned is that, interestingly, when weight started to come off, the anxieties about the business started to come off too. And I started to realize, wow, there's a real correlation here that I was not as mindful of, which I now am very mindful of. I still am probably need to be about 40 pounds more mindful of, but I'm working.
Yeah, I hear you. I had the same thing. I had some health issues when I was really getting the business off the ground. And what you don't realize, and you just mentioned it, the correlation, you don't realize that when you get your health in order, you have a lot more energy for that business. It's definitely a one-to-one thing, that the better off your health is, the better off your business is going to be, and everybody around you.
Sure.
So that's why I touched on it at the end of the book, because it doesn't make any sense to build wealth unless you're going to have the health to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've all seen that, haven't we, where somebody's got a great running business, but they're on death's door, it would seem. And what will it say on that tombstone? Here lies Joe Smith. He worked really hard.
That's right. Exactly.
Last question. If any of our listeners wanted to connect with you directly, learn more about what you're doing at Dispenza Financial, or pick up a copy of the new book, what's the best way for them to connect, Joe?
The best way to connect with me and find out anything about me is dispenzafinancial.com. The website has everything on there. It's got the book. There's a tab for the book, and then there's the blog where I write, and just anything else about me. So that's a good place, dispenzafinancial.com.
Awesome. Joe, thanks so much for joining me and sharing your insights behind Freedom is the Goal and decades of work helping business owners and the family business leaders build real, lasting wealth. Again, we've been speaking with Joe Dispenza, Financial Total Wealth Management, and I'm your host, Ed Delia, and this has been another episode of Growing Up B2B. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Joe, thank you so much for being with us today.
Ed, thanks for having me on. This has been great.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning into Growing Up B2B. To explore more episodes and insights, visit podcast.delianet.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. Having worked with hundreds of family-led businesses across my career and being a second-generation leader myself, I'm on a mission to help every family business I meet achieve next-level growth for their organization. So feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's support each other. You can also find out more about my company at delianet.com. Again, I'm your host, Ed Delia, and thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.
Joseph Dispenza and Dispenza Financial LLC are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial.